What if your own father stole your future? I always believed my childhood was the kind others would envy. We lived in a 2-story house in a quiet neighborhood where the mail arrived on time and the neighbors waved with routine cheer. My father, a respected pediatrician, commanded admiration everywhere he went. My mother, graceful and composed, was the image of support and warmth. At school, teachers knew my last name and always expected me to excel. And for a long time I did. I lived inside a world that looked picture perfect from the outside. But even the prettiest pictures can hide brushstrokes of control, fear, and disappointment. I remember my 9th birthday vividly. I wanted a set of watercolor paints I'd seen at the art store. I told my mom. She smiled, but when I unwrapped my gift that evening, it was a child-sized lab coat and a plastic stethoscope. My father said, "One day, this won't be a toy." Everyone laughed. I did too, but I didn't touch the coat again. As the years passed, that feeling of being slightly off, slightly not mine, began to grow. My choices, even the smallest ones, were often overridden by my father's opinions. I wanted to join the school choir, but he said music was a hobby, not a priority. When I wanted to attend summer art camp, he signed me up for a youth science program instead. "It's for your own good," he said every time. Back then, I didn't question it. He was my father, he was respected, he knew best, or so I thought. My mother rarely interfered. She would give me a gentle squeeze on the shoulder or leave my favorite snack out when I was upset. But she never confronted him, never challenged him on my behalf. I assumed she agreed with him, that they were united. I didn't realize until much later how many things she had quietly surrendered. We had dinner together every evening, chicken cooked just the way he liked, vegetables seasoned to his preference, the television turned off so he could tell us about his day at the clinic. If I had something to share, I waited for his monologue to end, and even then, he often responded with disinterest unless my news involved school awards or test scores. I remember once telling him I was selected to paint a mural for the school hallway. His response? "Don't waste too much time on that. Focus on what really matters." The mural was never finished. In public, he was warm and charming. He had a smile for everyone and a way of speaking that made strangers feel seen. At home, that same voice could freeze the air. A single raised eyebrow could silence a room. And yet, he never hit us, never yelled. His control came in quiet expectations and heavy silences, worse than punishment because it left no room to protest. My friends often said they admired my father. "He's so wise," they said. "You're lucky to have such a strong role model." And I believed them. I told myself I was lucky, that I should be grateful. But gratitude started to feel like a cage. By the time I entered high school, I had learned to smile when he was around, nod when he spoke, and never reveal what I truly felt. My dreams, my questions, my confusion, I kept them locked away. I became an expert at pretending. And yet there were moments I couldn't forget, like the time I got lost in a sketch at 2 a.m., only to have him knock on my door, furious, not because I was awake, but because he found my drawing. "This won't help you in life," he said, holding the paper like it was a piece of trash. "You're wasting time." My mother stood behind him, silent. Her eyes didn't meet mine. Still, I convinced myself he cared. That he pushed because he loved me. That his rules were a form of protection. It wasn't until much later that I realized love shouldn't feel like this. Love shouldn't require you to disappear to be accepted. Back then, though, I couldn't see the whole picture. I only knew something felt wrong and that I was too afraid to name it. That fear kept me quiet. That fear made me obedient, until the day something broke, subtly, but permanently. That story, however, begins with a different kind of pressure, one that would define the next stage of my life. By the time I turned 16, the pattern was unmistakable. My father didn't just guide my life, he dictated it. His control wasn't loud or angry, it was precise and constant. From the moment I woke up to the time I went to bed, I lived within the narrow corridors of his expectations. He had a way of turning suggestions into commands. "You should join the advanced biology class." Became a fixed part of my schedule. "You'll start volunteering at the hospital this summer." Meant my weekends were no longer mine. Even my meals were subtly monitored. If I reached for too many sweets, he'd raise an eyebrow and say, "That's not the diet of a future doctor." The title, future doctor, followed me like a shadow. I never chose it. It was spoken over me, engraved into conversations, birthday cards, report cards, whispered by teachers who'd been told by my father what I would become. "Your father says you've got the mind for medicine," they would say, handing back my essays with good grades but blank encouragement. No one ever asked what I wanted. And yet, I obeyed. I took the classes. I attended the prep sessions. I stayed up late memorizing anatomy terms instead of sketching, and every time I felt a flicker of rebellion, every time I wanted to scream or run or rip up another medical textbook, I reminded myself that this was for my future, or at least the future he imagined for me. My mother, again, stayed quiet. Sometimes she'd bring me tea late at night while I studied. She'd sit on the edge of my bed, gently tucking my hair behind my ear. "You're doing so well," she'd whisper. I wanted her to say more. I wanted her to say, "It's okay to stop." But she never did. There was a moment, I remember it vividly, when I walked past the guest room and saw my father's laptop open. He was out. My curiosity got the better of me. The screen showed a spreadsheet: dates, college applications, timelines, career milestones, all labeled with my name. It felt like a blueprint, a life already built without me. I closed the laptop quietly and walked back to my room. That night, I couldn't sleep. Not because I was scared of disappointing him, but because I finally realized I didn't exist in his version of my life. Still, I told myself he was trying to help, that he had good intentions, that he wanted me to succeed. But what he never understood, what he never allowed space for, was that success without choice is just another form of failure. He controlled what I studied, who I saw, even how I dressed. When I wore a shirt with paint smudges on it one weekend, he said, "You look sloppy. People will judge you, especially in your field." My field, the one I never chose. The control wasn't always direct. Sometimes it came in the form of quiet disappointment. When I got a B in chemistry, he didn't yell. He just looked at me and said, "I thought you wanted to go to med school?" That sentence sat in my chest like a stone for weeks. Over time, I stopped sharing my thoughts with him. I stopped asking questions. I became the version of myself he wanted: silent, studious, compliant. But that version wasn't real. It was a costume, a projection. Underneath, I was fading. Every decision he made for me tightened the cage. Every good job that followed an achievement he orchestrated felt hollow. It wasn't my job. It wasn't my effort. It was his path, his plan, his pride. And yet, in the eyes of everyone else, he was a model father. Present, involved, ambitious for his child. That's the hardest part of living under quiet control. No one sees the damage. No one notices the bruises when they're invisible. At school, I smiled. I got awards. I was called lucky and blessed. Inside, I was exhausted. The worst part, I started to believe I couldn't function without his approval. That if I ever walked away from his path, I would fall apart. That kind of control doesn't just shape your life, it reshapes your self-worth. I clung to the routine because it was all I knew. And in that routine, I began to vanish. But sometimes, it only takes a small moment, a single interaction, to shift the course of everything. And for me, that moment was just around the corner. The summer before my senior year of high school, I sat in a cramped guidance counselor's office blinking under fluorescent lights as she asked the same question I'd heard 100 times. "So, pre-med, right?" I nodded out of reflex. She smiled. "Your father already dropped off your list of target schools. Harvard, Johns Hopkins, Stanford. Very ambitious." There it was again, my future, already decided, already moving forward without me. I forced a smile and thanked her, even though every bone in my body wanted to scream. That night, I pulled out my sketchbook from under my bed. It was old and worn, the pages warped from years of hiding. I flipped to the back where I'd drawn a series of portraits, faces of strangers I'd imagined, moments I'd frozen in graphite. Drawing was the one thing that felt like mine, untouched by expectations. Every time I put pencil to paper, I felt free. I stayed up late sketching a new image: a girl behind a glass wall, her mouth open, screaming, but no sound came out. I looked at it for a long time after I finished, tears pooling in my eyes. That fall, the art teacher at my school, Mr. Bryant, noticed me doodling in the corner of a notebook. After class, he asked if I'd ever considered submitting work to a youth art showcase downtown. I shook my head and told him, "I'm gonna be a doctor." He raised an eyebrow. "Is that what you want?" I didn't know what to say. No one had asked me that in years. He handed me a flyer anyway. "If you change your mind," he said, "the deadline's in 2 weeks." I took it home, folded it in half, and slipped it between the pages of my biology textbook. That night, I stared at it for hours. Finally, in a burst of desperation, I snuck out of the house early Saturday morning with a small portfolio of sketches tucked into my backpack. I walked to the art center and handed them over. The woman behind the desk smiled and said, "These are beautiful. I'm glad you brought them." When the letter came 2 weeks later, an official envelope from the showcase, I opened it alone in my bedroom. I'd been selected. My hands trembled. For the first time in years, something I'd done, something that mattered to me, was being recognized. But I couldn't tell my father. He thought I was volunteering at the hospital that weekend. I told my mother, quietly, hoping she might understand. She looked at the letter, then at me. Her voice was soft. "Does it make you happy?" I nodded. She didn't smile. "Be careful," she said. "You know how your father gets." The day of the showcase, I said I had an early shift at the hospital. My heart raced as I dressed, not in scrubs or neutral clothes, but in a soft green blouse with paint flecks on the sleeves. I walked to the center, trying not to imagine what would happen if he found out. The room buzzed with people, and my work was there, on a wall framed, labeled with my name. Strangers walked by and paused. Some even complimented it out loud. For the first time, I felt visible, not as the future doctor, Just me. Then I heard a familiar voice. Excuse me, are you the artist? I turned, startled, to see Mr. Bryant. He grinned, then leaned closer. I had a feeling I'd see your work here. This is real talent, you know that, right? I tried to speak, but the lump in my throat was too thick. That night I came home late. My father was waiting in the kitchen. Where were you? He asked, not angry, just cold. Volunteering, I lied. He nodded slowly. You didn't sign in, I called the hospital. I froze. My mouth went dry. I don't like being lied to, he said, his voice measured, dangerous in its calm. What's going on? I couldn't speak. I couldn't move. He stepped forward. You think art is going to get you anywhere in life? You think that's a real future? I stared at him, trying not to cry. It's what I love. He didn't shout. He didn't hit me. He just turned and walked away. That silence, that absence of response, hurt more than any punishment. For days afterward, he wouldn't look at me, wouldn't speak. At dinner, he passed dishes without comment. The space between us grew wide and sharp. But something had shifted inside me. I'd tasted something real, something mine, and I knew for the first time that I couldn't keep living for him. The silence in our home became a new kind of noise, thick, unspoken tension that filled every corner. My father didn't need to raise his voice. His absence of words was punishment enough. He moved around the house like I wasn't there, speaking to my mother but not to me, acknowledging my presence only with a glance, never a word. At first, I thought it would pass, that, like in the past, he'd simmer down and things would return to their strained normal, but this time was different. My act of defiance, the art show, the lie, the truth that leaked through, had struck a deeper chord, and still, I continued to walk the line between two lives. I went back to studying, to preparing for the sights, to shadowing at the hospital, but I also kept drawing, only at night, only when the house was quiet, only when I knew he wouldn't see. My mother tried to bridge the gap between us. She started placing small notes on my desk, reminders to eat, encouragement to rest. They were her silent way of saying, I see you even if he doesn't, but that wasn't enough to quiet the growing storm inside me. Every day, the weight of obedience became harder to carry. One night, during dinner, I finally broke. He was discussing an upcoming career fair, one that he had signed me up for without asking. You'll meet representatives from the best pre-med programs, he said. I've arranged a meeting with a colleague from Duke. I put down my fork. I'm not going. His fork paused in mid-air. My mother went still. What? I said I'm not going. I repeated, my voice shaking. I don't want to be a doctor. I never did. His expression didn't change. Don't be ridiculous. You're 17. You don't know what you want. I know I don't want this. He didn't respond. Just stared at me like I was a stranger. Then he pushed his chair back, stood up, and walked out. That night, I cried harder than I had in years, not from guilt, but from the sheer weight of saying the words aloud. I had crossed a line I could never uncross, and I wasn't sure if I'd lost my father in the process. In the weeks that followed, the tension escalated. He tried to negotiate, to reason with me in his own way. You're throwing everything away, he said one morning. All the work we've done, all the sacrifices, you made those decisions, I said. Not me. He shook his head. You'll regret this. Maybe I would. But regret, I was learning, was easier to live with than resentment. My mother, caught in the middle, started breaking down too. I saw her cry in the laundry room, her hands shaking over a pile of shirts. I wanted to comfort her, but I didn't know how to reach her. She was still trapped. By her love for him, by the years of keeping peace at the cost of her voice. I started spending more time at the art center. Mr. Bryant offered me weekend hours helping younger students. It paid a little. It gave me space to breathe. But the cost of choosing myself was high. At school, rumors spread that I was acting out. Some teachers started treating me differently, less proud, more puzzled. But your father said, was a phrase I heard too often, as if my identity was an extension of his and my choices a betrayal. And yet, despite the turmoil, I began to feel something unfamiliar, relief. There's a strange freedom in finally accepting the consequences of your truth. I had lost his approval, yes, but I had also gained something I didn't know I'd been missing, the right to my own life. Still, that right came with a painful awareness of everything I was sacrificing. My mother's quiet glances, my father's cold silences, the sense of safety that had once wrapped our family like a blanket, the unseen cost of obedience had been my voice. And now, the price of freedom was their love, at least, the version of it I'd always known. But somewhere in that silence I found myself again, slowly, painfully, one page at a time. It was a cold morning in early October when my life pivoted in a way I never saw coming. I was volunteering at the art center, helping set up for a community exhibit, when a woman approached me with a clipboard and a kind, observant gaze. You're the one who painted the glass girl piece, right? She asked. I nodded, feeling my chest tighten. That drawing, the one of the girl behind the glass, screaming silently, had been the most vulnerable thing I'd ever created. She extended her hand. I'm Alina. I work with the Regional Youth Arts Scholarship Fund. We sponsor students who show promise and passion. Your work spoke to me. I shook her hand, unable to form words. Over the next hour, we talked. Really talked. She asked questions no one else had, about my influences, my process, my dreams. And then she said something I'll never forget. Just because someone gave you a map doesn't mean you have to follow it. You're allowed to draw your own. I don't know why it was that sentence that undid me. Maybe because it was the first time someone outside of my limited world acknowledged what I'd always known in my bones. I wasn't lost. I was just on the wrong path. Before she left, Elena handed me a brochure and her card. The deadline is next month. Submit a portfolio, no pressure, just think about it. I held onto that brochure like it was a lifeline. That night, I sat at my desk, surrounded by sketches, paintings, and half-finished ideas. For the first time, I let myself imagine a future not as a doctor, not as a disappointment, but as myself. And that vision, it was terrifying, but it was also beautiful. Still, I didn't tell my father. At school, I continued to play the role he expected. I kept my grades up, I went to science club. But every day after class, I went straight to the art center, quietly building my portfolio, piece by piece. My mother noticed. She never asked directly, but one evening, she left a sealed envelope on my desk. Inside was a letter she'd written years ago, but never sent. In it, she described her own abandoned dreams. How she had once wanted to be a writer. How she'd turned down a publishing internship to marry my father. How over time she convinced herself that loving him was enough. But in the quiet parts of her soul, the words still stirred. She wrote, I stayed silent because I thought that was how families survived. But watching you now, I wonder if I was wrong. I read that letter over and over, tears blurring the words. For so long, I'd thought my mother was just complicit. But here she was, hurt, resigned, yet still hoping in her own way. A few days later, I stayed late at the art center, scanning my work for the scholarship submission. As the files uploaded, I felt both exhilarated and terrified. Once I hit submit, there would be no going back. But I did it. I submitted. 2 weeks later, an envelope arrived. Thick, heavy, real. I waited until the house was empty. Then I opened it. I'd been accepted. Full tuition for a private art college 2 states away. A letter of congratulations. A note about how rare and powerful. My voice was on the canvas. My breath caught. Then I heard the garage door open. I had maybe 3 minutes before my father came in. Without thinking, I hid the envelope in the back of my closet. My heart raced as he walked past my room without knocking. Dinner was quiet that night. The usual routine. Polite questions from my mother. My father flipping through a medical journal. And me, sitting there with a storm in my chest and a future in my pocket. That night, I stared at the ceiling, wondering how I could ever tell them. How could I make him see? And then it hit me, maybe I never could. Maybe the person who needed to understand the most was me. I had been waiting for his approval, his permission, his blessing. But this life, it wasn't his to grant. I never meant to find the letter. I wasn't snooping, just looking for some old family photos to include in a school project. My mother kept them in the top drawer of her wardrobe, tucked beneath blankets and handkerchiefs. That's where I found the envelope. Worn, yellowed slightly with age, sealed but never mailed. It had her handwriting on the front. My father's name. Something about it felt sacred, almost too intimate to touch. But my fingers moved before my conscience could stop them. I slid the paper from the envelope, unfolded it gently, and began to read. The words punched me in the gut. It was a goodbye letter. Not dramatic, not filled with rage, just tired, aching honesty. My mother had written it the year I turned 12, at a time I remembered her seeming more withdrawn than usual. In it, she described her loneliness, how she'd watched her dreams dissolve into routine, how she felt like a ghost in her own home. She wrote, I stay because of our child. Because I'm afraid that leaving would break her, and maybe me too. But I am not happy. I don't know if I ever will be in this life. I sat on the floor for a long time, letter in hand, heart unraveling. I had never heard her speak that way before. Not even in her most fragile moments. I thought I'd imagined her sadness, exaggerated it even. But here it was, quiet and written, the truth of a woman who had swallowed her voice for years. Suddenly, all the small silences, the lingering glances, the missed opportunities, they made sense. This wasn't just about me. It never had been. The control my father wielded didn't stop with me. It had wrapped around her too, suffocating her spirit so slowly that I hadn't even noticed until I was old enough to feel the same constriction in my chest. I put the letter back exactly where I found it, careful to leave no trace. But something in me had shifted permanently. That weekend, I watched my parents from across the dining room table. My father discussed work, community health initiatives, and local politics. My mother nodded when appropriate, served the dishes without comment, her smile so small it barely moved her cheeks. She caught my gaze once and held it, just for a second. I wondered if she knew I had found the letter. Maybe she did. Maybe she'd left it there on purpose. I thought about asking her, telling her, but I couldn't find the words. The truth between us was too fragile, and I was afraid that speaking it aloud might make it collapse. That night, I went for a walk. The autumn wind stung my face, and the streetlights hummed softly in the still air. I ended up at the art center. It was closed, but I sat on the front steps, my jacket pulled tightly around me, the envelope from the scholarship offer still in my pocket. I pulled it out and read it again. You have a gift that deserves to be nurtured. The words didn't feel real. Not yet. When I got home, I found my mother in the kitchen. She was making tea, her movements slow and deliberate. I sat down across from her, unsure of what I wanted to say. But she spoke first. Did you find it? She asked, not looking up. I nodded. She poured hot water into the mugs and set one in front of me. I never sent it, she said softly. I couldn't. I was too scared. I wrapped my hands around the cup, letting the steam rise between us. You shouldn't have had to stay. She didn't respond right away. I thought I was doing what was best for you. I looked down. That's what he says too. She closed her eyes. Your father? He's not cruel, just afraid. He thinks control is love. That if he can shape everything, nothing will fall apart. But it already has. I whispered. Her hand reached across the table and held mine. You have a chance I never took. Don't waste it. In that moment, I realized something important. My mother wasn't weak. She had been surviving in the only way she knew how. And now, she was giving me permission, quietly, gently, to do what she couldn't. The next day, I walked into my father's study. The letter from the scholarship was in my hand. He looked up from his laptop, confused. What's that? I placed the envelope on his desk. It's where I'm going. Art school. Full ride. I'm leaving this house, and I'm not coming back until I've made a life that's mine. He stared at me, eyes unreadable. For a long time, he said nothing. Then, with a strange calm, he asked, Is this really what you want? Yes, I said. He nodded once slowly like someone finally accepting defeat, but his expression didn't show anger, just distance, and maybe, beneath that, something like sorrow. I left the room without waiting for a response. I had already said goodbye. Leaving home didn't feel triumphant. It felt like tearing, like pulling roots from soil that had been packed around them for nearly 2 decades. The morning I left, I didn't make an announcement. I packed quietly, slipping my sketchbooks into the bottom of a duffel bag, folding clothes around tubes of paint and pencils. The scholarship check was in my wallet. My acceptance letter, crumpled at the edges from so much rereading, stayed tucked inside the pages of a worn journal. My mother helped me load the car. She didn't cry. She didn't speak much at all, but when we closed the trunk, she reached out and fixed the collar of my coat, just like she did when I was little. I'll call you, she said, voice thick. Okay, I replied. We stood in silence for a moment longer before she pulled me into a hug, long, trembling, full of things neither of us could say aloud. Then she stepped back and nodded once. My father didn't come to the driveway. I saw him through the living room window, sitting in his usual chair, newspaper in hand, though I doubt he was reading it. That image stayed with me for a long time. His stillness, his refusal to look out, to acknowledge that I was going. It was both a punishment and a surrender. I drove away with my heart in knots. The streetlights flickered as I passed them, each one a tiny farewell. I expected freedom to feel lighter, but all I felt was the heaviness of everything I was leaving behind. The apartment was small, just a studio above a bookstore near campus. The floorboards creaked, the walls were thin, but it was mine. Every inch of it. I hung my artwork along one wall, spread a rug across the scuffed wood floor, and sat down on the mattress I'd borrowed from a friend of my mom's. For the first time in my life, the silence around me was my own. The first few weeks were hard. I'd underestimated how much of myself had been shaped by structure, by routine dictated from the outside. Without my father's expectations, I felt adrift. I missed meals. I forgot deadlines. Some days I didn't get out of bed at all. But slowly, I began to rebuild. I found a rhythm in morning walks through the park, in sketching by the window with a cup of coffee in hand. I met classmates who spoke the same language, visual thinkers, dreamers, creators who understood what it meant to feel out of place and still yearned to be seen. My professors were encouraging but demanding. They pushed me to dig deeper, to use pain and memory as tools instead of weights. One even commented, "Your work feels like someone trying to speak through walls." I want to see what happens when the walls fall. I poured myself into my art. Pieces that once took weeks came alive in days. I painted not for praise, not for grades, but because it helped me breathe. And then, one afternoon, something unexpected happened. I received a letter. It was in my father's handwriting. My hands shook as I opened it. The message inside was brief. I still don't understand your decision, but I suppose it's not mine to understand. You were always more like your mother than I wanted to admit. I hope that serves you well, Dad. No, I'm proud of you. No apology. But for him, it was monumental. I read it 3 times. Then I folded it and placed it in the same journal that held my scholarship letter. That night, I painted for 6 hours straight. It was a landscape. Our old backyard, the swing set long gone, the trees tall and bare. In the corner, a small figure stood at the edge of the frame, facing outward, back turned. It wasn't a painting of anger. It wasn't even grief. It was a painting of distance, of necessary space, of the quiet bravery it takes to walk away. 2 years passed without a word from my father beyond that one brief letter. At first, I told myself it didn't matter, that I didn't need his approval anymore, that I was building a new life, one brushstroke at a time. But the silence between us grew heavier with time, not lighter, like a room slowly filling with water, quiet, steady, impossible to ignore. My mother called occasionally. Her voice always carried a fragile warmth, as if she was trying to keep something alive between us. She never pushed me to reconnect with him, but I could hear it in the pauses, in the way her breath caught when she mentioned his name. And then, one Thursday afternoon, he came. I was preparing for my first solo gallery opening, small, intimate, just a few blocks from my apartment. The space had white walls, soft lighting, and wide windows that let in the late spring sun. I had worked for months to prepare, pouring memories, pain, and healing into every canvas. The crowd that evening was modest: classmates, instructors, a few locals who appreciated emerging talent. I was nervous but proud. For the first time, the work on the walls told my story without apology. Then I saw him, standing in the back corner, still, watchful, alone. My heart stopped. He looked older, grayer around the temples, shoulders slightly slouched. He wasn't holding a glass of wine or chatting politely, just standing there, eyes fixed on one of my pieces. The one I had painted of the backyard. The one with the small figure in the distance. He hadn't changed much in appearance, but something in his face was different. Softer, tired, maybe, or simply resigned. I didn't approach him, not at first. I wasn't sure if I could, but I watched as he moved slowly through the room, taking in each piece like he was walking through a museum of someone else's life. Finally, I gathered my courage and walked over. We stood side by side for a long moment in front of a canvas I had titled Inheritance. It was abstract. A tangled mass of wires stretching from a child's figure toward a dark, unseen figure on the edge. It was the most personal piece I had ever made. He spoke first. "This one's difficult to look at." I didn't respond. He cleared his throat. "You painted how it felt to grow up with me." I nodded. "I painted the truth." He exhaled slowly. "I didn't come to argue or defend. I wanted to see what you've become." There was a long silence, not uncomfortable, just real. I looked at him, really looked at him. His face, always so composed, now showed small cracks, tired eyes, the faintest tremble in his fingers. "You never wanted this for me," I said. He shook his head. "No. I didn't understand it, still don't. But I see what it means to you." I swallowed hard. "Why now?" He looked around the room, his eyes landing again on the painting of the backyard. "Because I missed you," he said, "and I was afraid it was too late." That sentence, simple, human, broke something open in me. It wasn't a full apology, it wasn't absolution. But it was something. We didn't hug. We didn't cry. But we stood there, two people who had once been tethered by expectation, now quietly facing the truth. "I don't hate you," I said. "I know," he replied, and that was enough. Later that night, after the show ended and the guests trickled out, I sat alone in the gallery. The space felt quieter without the buzz of voices, just me and the lingering scent of fresh paint. He hadn't stayed long. He didn't linger or offer to reconnect. But he came, and for a man like him, that act was seismic. I knew then that I would never have the father I once imagined, the one who championed my dreams, who celebrated my independence. That version didn't exist. But I had something else now. Distance, yes, but also peace, the beginning of understanding, and maybe, just maybe, the end of silence. After that night at the gallery, I expected things to change more quickly. They didn't. My father didn't call. He didn't send messages or show up unannounced. But the silence between us had shifted. It was no longer jagged and punishing. It was just space. Space I needed, and perhaps space he finally understood was necessary. My mother, however, changed in small, noticeable ways. One afternoon, she visited me without telling him. She brought a bag of pastries from the bakery we used to frequent when I was little, and stood in the doorway of my apartment like she wasn't sure she belonged. I hugged her tightly, and she whispered, "I wanted to see where you breathe." We spent hours sitting on the floor, sipping tea, talking in half sentences that didn't need finishing. She marveled at my paintings, touched the fabrics draped over my makeshift couch, and looked around with a gentle, satisfied smile. "You made a home," she said. "I had to?" I replied. She nodded. "I'm proud of you." Those words, simple and sincere, felt like a balm on old wounds. Over the weeks that followed, I learned more about her than I ever had before. She started writing again, quietly, privately. She even read me the opening lines of a story she'd kept hidden for decades. Her voice trembled at first, but then grew steady, confident. "I used to think it was too late for me," she said one night, her fingers resting on the rim of her tea mug. "But watching you reminded me it's never too late to start again. Even if it's small, even if no one sees it but me." She didn't speak much about my father. But one evening, when the sky was streaked with the last rays of sun, she confessed something that stayed with me. He never meant to crush us. He just didn't know how to let go of the shape he thought life should be. He was so afraid of failure that he held everything too tightly, even me. "Do you still love him?" I asked. She was quiet for a long time. "I love who he was, or maybe who I believed he could be." That sentence lingered in the room long after the tea had gone cold. Her visits became more frequent, though always short. She never stayed long, never brought him up again, but each time she left I felt lighter, stronger, more rooted. And then, one day, I found a short note under my door. It was in my father's handwriting. "I know I've hurt you, I know I can't undo it, but I saw you, really saw you. Thank you for letting me in. That moment will stay with me. Dad." It was the first time he acknowledged the pain outright. I didn't reply. Not because I was angry, but because I didn't need to anymore. I had spent years chasing his approval, waiting for him to see me, to choose me not as a reflection of himself but as a person with her own pulse. And now he had. Even if it came too late for closeness, it wasn't too late for peace. That summer I created a new series of paintings. They weren't about grief or resentment, they were about growth, healing. The slow, uneven climb toward selfhood. I named the collection The Quiet Room, after the place within myself where I had once hidden, and the space I now occupied freely. My mother came to the opening. She wore a pale blue dress and carried a notebook in her bag. My father didn't come, but I didn't need him to. This was mine. This was hers. This was the life we had both fought, in our own ways, to reclaim. The first year of independence was survival. The second was transformation. By the third, I was rebuilding. There's something almost spiritual about reclaiming yourself, piece by piece, choice by choice. It doesn't happen all at once. It happens on grocery runs when you realize you can buy cereal your father never allowed. It happens when you oversleep, miss a meeting, and no one scolds you. You learn to forgive yourself instead. I began to thrive in my own quiet rhythm. My apartment evolved from a sparse space into something lived in warm. Canvases leaned against walls, finished and half-finished. Light poured in through the large front windows, and sometimes I just sat and watched the dust swirl in the sun, marveling at the stillness I used to fear. School was hard, competition was fierce, deadlines were real, but I welcomed it all. This time the struggle belonged to me. Every frustration, every exhausted night, every triumph, it was mine, not borrowed from someone else's dream. The community I found among my peers was unlike anything I'd known. No one cared about GPAs or med school rankings. They cared about stories, emotion, vision. I was no longer shrinking myself to fit into a mold. I was expanding in every direction. One professor, an older woman named Margot, became my second mentor. She once told me, "You've got a history in your hands. That's what makes your work heavy, in the best way." That idea stuck with me. My past wasn't baggage anymore, it was material. I began exploring family themes in my projects: inheritance, memory, silence. Not to vilify, but to understand, to heal, and to help others see themselves in the reflection. At one exhibition, a visitor approached me and said, "Your piece reminded me of my daughter. We haven't spoken in years. I don't know if I'll ever fix that, but thank you." It hit me hard. Art had given me back my voice. Now it was reaching into other silences too. And still, my relationship with my father remained distant. We didn't talk on the phone. We didn't exchange emails. The few letters he sent after the gallery show were brief, carefully worded. I kept them all in a drawer, unanswered but not discarded. They served as reminders of something important: not all bridges have to be rebuilt. Some are better left as monuments. But my mother and I grew closer than ever. She started sending me pages of her writing, half-formed essays, stories about women who whispered to each other in kitchens and scribbled poetry between grocery lists. Her voice, once hidden beneath decades of silence, was rising. She even joined a local writers' circle. "It feels like stretching muscles I forgot I had," she told me on one call. "I ache, but in a good way." One afternoon, she called with news that startled me. "Your father's retiring." I was quiet for a moment. "How do you feel about that?" She laughed softly. "I don't know. He's been so consumed by his work for so long, I'm curious who he'll be without it." I didn't ask if she planned to stay. I wasn't sure I wanted to know. Later that week, I found myself painting a new piece. It was of two figures standing back to back. Not in anger, not even in grief, just in stillness. A kind of respectful distance. They weren't touching, but they weren't lost either. I titled it What Remains. I realized then that I didn't need reconciliation to find peace. I didn't need an apology wrapped in a bow. I had rebuilt myself from the ground up, not out of rebellion, but out of necessity. And love, for the girl I had been, for the woman I was becoming, and for the parts of my family I chose to carry forward. I was no longer fighting to prove anything. I was simply living, fully, freely, authentically. And for the first time that was enough. It was early spring when I received the invitation, crisp, cream-colored, with elegant lettering. My first official gallery opening, this time not as a student, but as a featured artist in a downtown exhibit alongside a handful of professionals I'd long admired. It wasn't the biggest venue in the city, but it was the kind of event that marked a shift, a new chapter, a kind of arrival. I almost didn't invite him. For days I let the invitation sit on my desk. My mother would be coming, of course. She was the first to RSVP, and she even offered to help hang some of the larger canvases. But for my father I hesitated. Did I want him there? Did it matter anymore? In the end, I sent the invite, no note, no expectations. He didn't reply. The night of the show arrived, and with it, a buzzing crowd. The gallery glowed with low lights and the hum of conversation. My work hung on the walls, pieces from all stages of my journey, early sketches full of confusion, bolder abstract works about control and freedom, and newer paintings that leaned into softness, recovery, and forgiveness. There was one painting in particular I was nervous about. It was the last piece I had finished before the show. I had painted it with shaking hands and an ache I thought I'd buried. It was of a man standing in a doorway, his face hidden in shadow. Behind him was a table set for three, 2 chairs occupied, one empty. It was titled When He Stayed Silent. Guests paused in front of that one the most. They asked questions. Was this about abandonment? Is the man meant to be a father figure? Did he ever come to the table? I gave them small answers. Vague truths. And then, in the middle of the evening, I saw him, standing at the edge of the room near the refreshments. He wore the same navy blazer he always had for important events. He looked out of place but not uncomfortable, just quiet, observing. He hadn't told me he was coming. I watched as he moved through the space, slower than most, his eyes scanning each painting, sometimes pausing longer, sometimes moving on quickly. When he stayed silent, he stood still for what felt like an eternity. I stood behind him, out of his line of sight, watching the rise and fall of his shoulders. Then he turned. We locked eyes. For a moment, we didn't move. The noise around us faded. Then he nodded once. It wasn't approval, it wasn't pride, it was recognition. I walked over, slowly, and stood beside him. You came, I said. I didn't plan to, he replied. But your mother, she said I should see. We both looked at the painting. I'm not the man in the doorway, he said quietly. But I recognize him. I didn't speak. After a pause, he added, I spent so many years trying to build something solid. I didn't realize I was building walls. I looked at him, expecting the old defensiveness, but it wasn't there, just wariness. People change, I said. Sometimes too late, he replied. No, just late enough. He looked down at his hands. I don't know if I can be the kind of father you needed. I stopped needing that a while ago. He winced, but nodded. Fair. We stood in silence again. Then he reached into his coat and pulled out a small, worn envelope. Your mother said you're submitting work for an international residency. I thought you might want this. I took the envelope and opened it. Inside was an old photo of me at 5 years old, painting on a sheet of newspaper in the backyard. My face was messy but joyful. Next to it, folded tightly, was a note. I didn't understand her, but she was always hers. It wasn't signed, but I knew who wrote it. He didn't stay long. After another quiet nod, he left the gallery, his steps slower than when he arrived. I watched him go without tears, without the ache that had once haunted every encounter. He had seen me. Maybe not completely, maybe not in the way I used to wish for. But finally, he had seen something. And sometimes that's all we get. And sometimes that's enough. After the gallery night, weeks passed before I heard from him again. And then, one afternoon I received a voicemail, just his voice, low measured, but somehow gentler than I remembered. I'm driving upstate for a few days. Thought I might stop by if you're free. No pressure. He didn't leave a return number. Just that simple message, like someone who knew he was asking for something he couldn't quite name. I called him back the next day. Yes, I said. You can come by, but just for coffee? He arrived on a rainy Tuesday, wearing the same worn coat, his umbrella dripping as he stepped inside. The years had softened him in subtle ways, his posture slightly bent, the sharpness of his features dulled by time. But his presence still carried weight, like a shadow that once loomed large and now simply followed. We sat at my small kitchen table, the kettle hissing softly behind us. He looked around at my apartment, at the walls lined with art and the plants growing in crooked ceramic pots. This place looks like you, he said. I smiled faintly. It is me. We drank in silence for a few minutes before I asked, why now? He set his cup down carefully. Because I think I owe you not an apology exactly, but an explanation. I waited. I thought I was doing the right thing, he began, rising you with structure, purpose. I believed if I controlled enough variables, you wouldn't fail. You wouldn't get hurt. But I did, I said. He nodded slowly. I see that now. I watched you slip away, piece by piece, and I told myself it was discipline, that it was love. A long pause passed between us. I've never known how to love without control, he admitted. That's not love, I said. He didn't argue. He stared out the window for a while, watching the rain blow the buildings across the street. I grew up in chaos, he said quietly. My father drank. My mother left. I promised myself I'd give my child the opposite. You gave me order, I replied, but no room to breathe. I know. Another silence, not heavy but fragile. I stayed away because I thought you hated me, he said finally. That I'd lost the right to know you? You did hurt me, I said, but I needed space more than revenge. I'm not asking to fix things, he said. I just wanted to tell you that I'm proud of you, and not because you turned out successful, but because you became someone real. Despite me. That sentence broke something open in me. I looked at him, this man who had once been larger than life, terrifying in his certainty, now sitting in my kitchen, unraveling in front of me. I never hated you, I said. I just needed to be someone you didn't design. He nodded. And now that you are, I'm still learning? I admitted. But I'm not afraid anymore. That seemed to land deeply with him. He looked down at his hands for a moment, then back at me. I won't ask for more than this, he said. I just wanted you to hear it from me. We talked a little longer, about art, about my mother, about nothing and everything, and when he left, he didn't hug me, he just touched my shoulder gently, then stepped back into the rain. I watched him walk down the street until he disappeared around the corner. That conversation didn't fix everything. It didn't erase the years or the scars, but it did something else, something quieter, deeper. It acknowledged the truth. And in that truth, we both found a small, unsteady kind of peace. Not the kind that heals all wounds, but the kind that says, I see you, I hear you, I won't try to control you anymore. And maybe in the end that was the only apology I ever needed. It's been 5 years since that conversation in my kitchen. 5 years of slow, careful living. 5 years of learning that healing doesn't come all at once, and that peace isn't always loud or obvious. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it's choosing not to pick up the phone. Sometimes it's saying no without guilt. My relationship with my father never returned to what it was, but I never wanted it to. We speak a few times a year, a holiday message, a letter on my birthday, sometimes a photo from a hike he's taken. He's retired now and, according to my mother, spends most of his time tending to a small garden behind their house. I don't ask for more. He doesn't push for it either. We have found a rhythm that works. Polite, distant, gentle. No longer adversaries, not quite friends, but something that resembles mutual respect, an understanding forged in the wreckage of control and silence. My mother, on the other hand, has blossomed. She published her first short story in a small literary magazine and started teaching community writing workshops on Saturdays. She still lives in the same house, but it feels different now, lighter. Once, during a visit, she pulled out a journal and handed it to me. I wrote it all down, she said, not for him, not for the world, for me. Inside were stories of her girlhood, her marriage, her grief, but also her joy, her rediscovery, her voice, clear and certain. I wasted a lot of years, she said that night, but I'm not wasting anymore. Watching her change helped me forgive parts of myself I didn't know I was holding on to. These days, I paint less for galleries and more for myself. I teach workshops to high school students, many of whom remind me of who I once was, afraid to speak, afraid to disobey. I tell them that art is resistance. That choice is power. That their stories matter. One girl, quiet and sharp-eyed, gave me a folded paper after class. Inside was a sketch, her, standing at a fork in the road. One path led to a shining city, the other, into a forest. Which did you choose? She had written underneath. I smiled. Neither, I wanted to tell her. I made my own. Choosing distance from my father wasn't born of hatred. It was an act of love, for myself. A boundary, not a wall. A necessary line between who I was forced to be and who I chose to become. And even now, when I see him in old photos or hear his voice on a voicemail, I don't flinch. I don't grieve the father I once longed for. I honor the one who finally stepped back. I remember the man who once stood in a gallery, silent, trying to understand the daughter he never allowed to speak. And I remember the version of myself who waited so long to be seen. She's gone now. In her place stands someone whole, someone quiet but unafraid, someone who knows that love without freedom is a cage, and that the most radical thing a daughter can do is choose herself. Sometimes, the people we're supposed to trust the most become the very ones who shape our fears. And sometimes, survival means choosing truth over tradition, distance over closeness, healing over harmony. If you've ever had to step away from someone in your family to find yourself, you're not alone. We carry those stories with us. We live them, and sometimes we outgrow them. I hope this story found you at the right time. What about you? Have you ever had to walk away from a family member to protect your peace? Share your experience in the comments below. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and join us for more stories that explore the deepest ties and the hardest breaks of family.